Alright, now that we've separated the master cylinder, I'm looking at the booster, and I can see that this must have been leaking at one point. Notice the paint is stripped from this booster, and much of the rest of the paint has been cracked. So if it wasn't leaking this last time, it had been leaking previously. So we'll clean this up, shine it up, and replace the master cylinder with the new master cylinder. Welcome back. What we've done is we've cleaned up this booster assembly. I scraped the old paint off that was cracked, corroded. I sanded it, and I used some lacquer thinner to clean it good. We primed it, and then we shot a coat of black gloss paint on that. So at this point we have the booster assembly ready. We have the new master cylinder. I also cleaned the brake reservoir, a little soap and water, and rinse that out good to get rid of the old grime. Now before we reassemble this master cylinder to the booster, don't forget there is a washer between these two to seal the boost, and it just goes on the end of the master cylinder in the groove. Just work it into that groove. And then we can reassemble these. Alright, the next step is to reassemble the supply lines for the reservoir, and I'm going to coat these in a little bit of old brake fluid just to lubricate the end. So these require quite a bit of force to press in. Okay, there's one. Now we'll do the other one. Okay, and there that is. The next step is to reinstall the supply reservoir and the hoses. Now the interesting thing about these hoses is they're not intuitive. They're crossed. If you notice one, this was removed. So you need to make sure that you get these back in the right orientation. These are actually a lot easier to reinstall than they are to remove. Alright, there's our reservoir. Now we'll get the bolt tightened there, and this is an unusual bolt. It has a washer on the head side. The next step, now that the booster and master cylinder have been reassembled, is to install this entire assembly into the car. So you might remember this was a little tricky. We have this cable that goes through this assembly, and then we have to feed the master cylinder back around the brake lines very carefully, I might add. And finally there's a little bit of a twist needed on the front in order to make this work. There it is. Now that the assembly is installed, what we need to do is install the bolt that holds the master cylinder from inside the cab. And fortunately this is lined up. You may have to jiggle it a little bit to get it lined up, but it's typically not that difficult. Now before I tighten that, what I'd like to do is go back under the hood, install all my other bolts and nuts, and then we'll tighten everything. Now back under the hood, what we need to do is connect this brace that runs from the pedal assembly up to the brace on the booster. And this bolt is a little tricky to get into this. You might get lucky, or you might need something to move the rod over to get this started. And remember, there was a number of washers on this bolt. We left the washers intact, so they're still in the same order. Very important, obviously, when you're working with the brakes, that you have all your hardware correct. Okay, now we can put the other nuts on the brace. Alright, we've tightened all of the hardware for the assembly. The next step is to just reconnect the brake lines, your brake failure warning lights, the vacuum hose, and so forth. Let's start with the vacuum hose. Very simply, just slide that back over the warning brake failure lights. Just find your orientation. It's not that difficult. There's three tabs. Also, hopefully you remembered which was front and which was back. They should be obvious. Okay, the next step is to reconnect the brake lines. Now with brake lines, no matter where you're working with these, on a caliper, on a master cylinder, it's very important to get this started without cross-threading these threads. The easiest way to do that is to play with your line until you can feel the nut starting smoothly with no cross-threading. That takes care of the vacuum assist line. Now we can put the other hoses back into place, reassemble this heater assembly, air conditioner assembly, and all of that. Careful about over tightening these clamps. These plastic fittings will crack very easily, obviously. They really just need to be snugged. Alright, we should have another blower hose